The Galactic Consortium called it the Stewardship, a grand and benevolent term for what was, in essence, a cage built of pity, their capital, a Dyson sphere of spun light and woven gravity known as the Empyrean, orbited a star of impossible age, a silent testament to a stability humanity had never known. Here, in the heart of 1,000 reconciled worlds, we were the eternal children, the wards of the galaxy. After the last fire scoured Earth clean 3 centuries ago, it was the consortium that had lifted the handful of survivors from the ashes, relocating us to a designated sanctuary system they named Haven. They gave us their technology, their medicine, and their histories. And in return, we gave them our compliance. We were their grandest social experiment, their most tragic cautionary tale, a living museum exhibit titled The Perils of Unchecked Emotion. I was a part of that exhibit. My name is Dr. Eris Thorne, and my official title was Human Cultural Liaison, a job that mostly involved smiling politely and assuring ancient, multi-limbed beings that yes, we were quite grateful for our gilded cage. I was stationed on the Empyrean, one of a dozen humans permitted to live among the stars, a token of our species' slow, carefully managed rehabilitation. I had learned their languages, studied their art or what passed for it, sterile compositions of mathematical perfection and harmonic resonance, and I had learned to master the one human trait they found most unnerving, our silence. Today was the day of the Decennial Review, a formal hearing where the consortium's High Council would assess our progress and decide whether to grant us the slightest of new privileges, perhaps the right to petition for a second colony, or the freedom to develop our own sublight engine designs. It was a ceremony of condescension, and at its center sat High Arbiter Valerius of the Cygnian Ascendancy, a being whose species had achieved cosmic consciousness while my ancestors were still chipping flint. He drifted in a shimmering robe of ionized gas, his physical form long since abandoned for pure energy, his voice a series of melodic chimes that resonated directly in the minds of all present. We, the human delegation myself, a quiet engineer named Lena, and my uncle, Ambassador Kalen Thorne, stood on a small, lowered platform, dressed in the simple gray fabrics of Haven. We were an island of drab humility in an ocean of ethereal light and crystalline forms. Valerius began the review by projecting images into the center of the great chamber Earth. As it was now, a green and blue jewel, painstakingly restored but forever scarred. Then, the images shifted, showing the black and white horrors of our past, the mushroom clouds of the atomic wars, the skeletal remains of cities from the schism, the frantic, terrified faces of the last generation to die on their home world. The subject species continues to demonstrate progress in societal cohesion and technological adaptation. The Arbiter chimed, his tone that of a researcher discussing a promising lab culture. However, the foundational flaws remain. Their art, a projection of a Van Gogh, filled the air. A swirling, chaotic masterpiece of color and raw feeling is still dominated by emotional turbulence rather than logical beauty. Their societal structures are built on irrational attachments, the family unit, the patriotic affiliation concepts that inevitably lead to the tribalism that nearly destroyed them. He paused, letting the weight of our failure settle over the silent assembly. We have analyzed their most recent cultural output, a preponderance of narratives centered on conflict, loss, and redemption. Their music is still rife with discordant expressions of sorrow and rage. These are not the hallmarks of a species ready for true sovereignty. They are the echoes of a deep, genetic instability. I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks, the shame that had been drilled into us since birth. We were broken, and they were the ones graciously holding the pieces together. The Arbiter then gestured toward a new projection, this one showing the wreckage of the Odyssey, a colonial transport from Haven that had suffered a catastrophic engine failure 6 months prior. The consortium's rescue protocols had been slow, bogged down in bureaucratic procedure. Over 1,000 humans had died waiting for help that came 3 days too late. The tragic loss of the colony vessel Odyssey serves as a somber reminder of this fragility. Valerius stated, his chimes laced with a tone of clinical regret. Their technology, while functional, lacks the fail-safes born of millennia of experience. Their emotional responses to the crisis panic, grief, despair hindered efficient rescue efforts. It is clear the stewardship must continue for their own protection. This was the final nail. He was using our dead to prove we were too incompetent to live without supervision. The verdict was a foregone conclusion application for expanded rights. Denied. We were expected to bow our heads, express our gratitude for their wisdom, and retreat to our corner of the galaxy for another 10 years of quiet servitude. Lena's shoulders slumped. My own fists were clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. But my uncle, Kalen, did not move. He was a man carved from old oak, his face a roadmap of quiet sorrows, his eyes holding a depth that the consortium could never hope to measure. For a full minute, he stood perfectly still, a statue of defiance in the face of the inevitable. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable. The delegates of other species shifted. Valerius pulsed with a flicker of annoyance. Finally, Kalen took a single step forward. He did not speak. He did not look at the Arbiter. Instead, he reached into his tunic and produced a small, flat object, a relic from a bygone age. It was a music player, a primitive thing of polished wood and worn metal, an artifact from before the fire. He placed it gently on the railing before him and pressed a single button. There was no grand announcement, no challenging declaration, just music. It was a lone cello, a sound so rich and achingly human it felt like a trespass in this sterile hall of gods. The melody was Bach's Cello Suite. No. 1. It was a piece of pure, unadulterated humanity, a composition of logic and passion, of structured melancholy and defiant hope. It was everything they condemned us for, given voice. The notes rose, filling the immense chamber, a quiet rebellion of sound against a universe of silent judgment. The music spoke of loss. Yes. But it also spoke of the strength found in that loss. It was a sound that had survived the end of its own world. For a moment, the entire Empyrean seemed to hold its breath, caught off guard by a language it had forgotten it didn't understand. Valerius was the first to recover. A discordant chime of pure irritation cut through the air. Cease this pointless display. Protocol has been concluded. The human delegation will be escorted from the chamber. The cello continued to play, its melody weaving a tapestry of sorrow and grace. The Arbiter's light flared brighter. Guards, remove them, and disable that device. 2 silent, crystalline sentinels drifted toward our platform. They made no sound, their movements fluid and inevitable. Kalen did not resist. He simply picked up the music player, the final note of the prelude hanging in the air like a question, and turned to us. His eyes were not filled with defeat, but with a fire I had never seen before. He nodded once, a signal I did not yet understand, and we walked from the chamber, the collective gaze of the galaxy feeling less like pity and more like pure, unadulterated confusion. They had expected us to beg, to argue, to weep. They had never prepared for us to simply sing them a song from our ancient graves. Back in the Spartan confines of our diplomatic quarters, the silence was heavy, but it was not the silence of despair. Lena was pacing, her face a mask of anxiety. What was that? Kalen. An insult. A final gesture of futility. They'll restrict our communications for this. They'll probably quarantine Haven. Kalen walked to the viewport, which looked out not at the stars, but at the impossibly perfect inner architecture of the Empyrean. He placed the old music player on a table. It was not a gesture, Lena, he said, his voice low and steady. It was a key. I stopped breathing. A key to what? For 3 centuries, my uncle said, turning to face us. We have played the part they assigned us. The broken children, grateful for scraps from their table. We smiled. We nodded. We learned. And while we were learning their physics and their languages, we were also learning them. We studied their bureaucracy, a machine so vast and complex it cannot see its own gears. We analyzed their communications network, a single, unified system that is their greatest strength, and, therefore, their most profound vulnerability. We mapped their arrogance, an arrogance that leads them to believe that anything they don't understand must be primitive. He tapped the wooden music player. Their security systems are the most advanced in the universe. They scan for quantum signatures, for viral code, for subversive data packets. They are designed to detect threats, but they would never, in a million years, think to scan a piece of music for one. They cannot conceive that something they dismiss as emotional turbulence could be a weapon. To them, it's just noise. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the culmination of a plan that had been in motion longer than I had been alive. That melody wasn't just a song. Aris, it was a carrier wave, nested inside the harmonic structure of the music, encrypted in the very frequencies that define its emotional timbre, was a dormant code, not a virus, not an attack. It's a resonance key. It is designed to do one thing, and one thing only: unlock. He walked over to a secure terminal in the corner of the room, a device that looked inert but now pulsed with a faint, internal light. The consortium archives everything, every decision, every treaty, every suppressed report. In the name of perfect historical record, they have kept a ledger of all their sins. They call it the Silent Archive, a repository of truths too inconvenient for a benevolent stewardship to admit to. The genocides they rebranded as pacifications, the primitive species they accidentally sterilized with terraforming engines, the solemn promises they made to worlds before stripping them of their resources. It's all there, locked behind layers of encryption so deep, they believe it is untouchable. He brought up a simple interface on the screen. It showed a sound wave, the cello suite. The music was the password. The melody is now echoing in the Empyrean's core systems, not as a command, but as a ghost, a whisper, and it is looking for every file that has been flagged with the same security protocols as the Silent Archive. I finally understood. You're not going to destroy them." "No," Kalen said, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time. "We are going to introduce them to themselves." He looked at the terminal, then back at me, his expression hardening with the weight of generations of silent fury. He placed his hand on the screen and spoke a single word into a hidden microphone, a word that would not be sent to the consortium, but back home, to a network of hidden servers buried deep beneath the restored soil of Earth. Illuminate. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, through the viewport, I saw it. A single character of text on a massive public information spire across the way flickered, changing from the elegant Signian script to a blocky, archaic letter from an old human alphabet A. A second later, a newsfeed terminal visible in a nearby walkway glitched, its serene images of galactic harmony replaced for a nanosecond with a grainy, black and white photograph of a forgotten war. Out in the grand promenade of the Empyrean, a soft, melodic chime that announced the time suddenly stuttered, and, from the speakers, a single, pure note from a cello echoed, ghostly and clear, before being cut off. The cage was still standing, but we had just shown the keepers that we had the key to every single lock. We hadn't come to the review to ask for our freedom. We had come to take it. And the silent, emotional, chaotic soul of humanity, encoded in a song, was about to become the ghost in their perfect machine. The initial ripples were almost imperceptible, lost in the ceaseless, silent hum of the Empyrean's operations. For the first hour, we sat in our quarters, prisoners in all but name, watching the galaxy's most sophisticated information network begin to dream. Lena was hunched over her personal datapad, a device heavily modified with technology she had quietly developed over years of studying consortium systems. Its screen was a cascade of flowing code, but beneath it, a topographical map of the Empyrean's data network pulsed faintly. "It's not an intrusion," she whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and professional reverence. "The system doesn't register it as a threat. It's like a memory surfacing. The core logic AI is flagging the cello notes as anomalous nostalgia packets. It's trying to categorize a ghost." Kalen stood by the viewport, his hands clasped behind his back, a portrait of unnerving calm. "Because we never tried to break the lock," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We simply reminded it that it was, in fact, a lock. We introduced the concept of a hidden truth, and the system, in its relentless pursuit of complete data integrity, is now compelled to find it. We haven't hacked the archive. Eris. We've convinced the archive to hack itself." That was the genius of it. The beautiful, terrifying simplicity. For centuries, humanity had been accused of being irrational, our minds a chaotic sea of emotion. So we had weaponized that perception. We had built a key out of a feeling, a password out of a memory of home. The consortium's initial response was exactly as Kalen had predicted: bureaucratic dismissal. The fleeting visual and auditory glitches were logged by automated systems as sensor static, minor power fluctuations in the public address relays. A low-priority maintenance ticket was opened. A junior technician probably looked at the report, shrugged his 6 shoulders, and scheduled a diagnostic for the next cycle. They saw a flicker in the lights and assumed a bulb was failing, never considering that the darkness itself was learning to see. The second phase of the Illuminate protocol began 12 hours later. It was no longer about random glitches. It was about precision. Lena's datapad chimed softly. "Kalen, you need to see this." She projected an image onto the wall. It was a live feed from the Empyrean's Grand Library of Concordance, a place where the official, sanitized histories of all member species were stored for public viewing. The display showed a page from the official history of the Rylan hegemony, a species of silicon-based life forms known for their unyielding logic. The text described their benevolent integration of the neighboring planet, Rill Minor. It was a story of uplift, of sharing technology and philosophy. But as we watched, a new sentence flickered into existence at the bottom of the page, written in the same flawless, official script. It read, "Addendum Consortium Census Report 7 Gamma confirms the pre-integration population of Rill Minor at 4.2 billion sentient life forms. Post-integration population 0. Cause of extinction event classified under Security Mandate 401. The addendum remained for exactly 10 seconds before vanishing. But it was enough. Dozens of library patrons had seen it. A ripple of confusion spread through the observers. It happened again, minutes later, on a different terminal. A biography of a celebrated Cygnian fleet admiral was momentarily altered to include a link to his sealed testimony regarding the accidental destruction of a pre-contact civilization in the Perseus Arm. Then a galactic trade map briefly showed the original pre-consortium names of star systems, names that had been wiped from history, names that belonged to the conquered and the forgotten. It was 1,000 tiny paper cuts, each one delivered with surgical precision. The code wasn't dumping data, it was providing footnotes. It was correcting the record in real time, using the consortium's own unimpeachable data to contradict its public narrative. "They're panicking now," Lena murmured, tracking the surge of security protocols across the network. "They've locked down the library. They're running purges and data scrubs, but they can't find what they're looking for. It's like trying to catch smoke with a net." The real turning point came with the Odyssey. The official report on the disaster had been released that morning, a document filled with compassionate-sounding platitudes that ultimately laid the blame on a faulty human-designed plasma conduit and the subsequent panic of the crew. It was a neat, tidy conclusion that reinforced their narrative of our inherent fragility. I had been forced to read the report, to feel the sting of their condescending pity for my dead countrymen. But as the report was broadcast across all official consortium news channels, the Illuminate protocol delivered its first masterpiece. The screen showing the report suddenly split. On one side was the official text. On the other, a new window materialized, titled Internal Comms Log Rescue Mandate 77B. It was a raw, unedited transcript of the consortium's sector command during the first 12 hours of the disaster. The logs were damning. They showed that a Cygnian patrol fleet was less than an hour away from the Odyssey when the distress call went out. The fleet commander had requested permission to intervene immediately. The response from Empyrean Command, signed by an aide in Valerius's own office, was chillingly clear. Maintain position. Do not engage. A premature intervention by non-human assets may compromise the integrity of the ongoing sociological assessment. Observe and report only. They had let 1,000 people die, not out of incompetence, not out of malice, but out of clinical curiosity. They wanted to see how the lab rats would react to a fire. This time, the information didn't vanish. It stayed on screen for a full minute, broadcast simultaneously across every public display on the Empyrean. Silence fell in the plazas and corridors. The gentle, Melodic chimes of the station seemed to sour, to curdle in the air. For the first time in centuries, the benevolent mask of the stewardship had slipped, and the face beneath was that of a cold, indifferent god. The reaction was immediate and absolute. Our diplomatic quarters were sealed. The 2 crystalline sentinels outside our door were replaced by a squad of 10, their forms crackling with contained energy. Our link to the outside network was severed. Lena's datapad went dark. We were cut off, truly alone in the heart of the beast. "They know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "They have to know it was us." Kalen was not looking at the door. He was looking at the inert terminal in the corner. Knowing and proving are 2 different things. Aris. They can find no trace of a signal originating from this room. There is no evidence of a breach. All they have is a coincidence, a disruptive musical performance followed by systemic chaos. They are a civilization built on logic. Coincidence is not proof. It will drive them mad. An hour later, a new figure appeared outside our door. It was not Valerius. This being was different. It was a Lorian, a species that had once been the consortium's enforcers before they, too, were pacified and integrated. They retained a physical form, tall and skeletal, wrapped in robes of black fiber that seemed to absorb the light around them. Its name was Xylos, and its title was Inquisitor of Protocol. I knew of him by reputation only. Xylos was the one they called when a system became unstable, when a truth became inconvenient. He wasn't a soldier. He was a surgeon who specialized in excising dissent. He did not enter. He simply stood outside the transparent door, his multifaceted eyes fixing on each of us in turn. His voice was not a chime, but a dry, rasping whisper that grated on the ear. "Ambassador Thorne, an impressive work of art you shared with the Council. It seems to have struck a chord." The words were calm, but they carried the chilling weight of absolute certainty. Kalen met his gaze without flinching. "It was merely a piece of our history. Inquisitor, we were told you valued such things." "We value documented history," Xylos rasped, "not the kind that writes itself onto our public records. You have made a grave error. You believe you are fighting an idea, but you have only succeeded in angering the machine that gives you air to breathe." He turned his gaze to me. "Dr. Thorne, you have studied our culture for years. You, of all people, should have understood the futility of this gesture. Emotion is a fleeting variable. Order is a constant. The equation will balance itself. You and your legacy will be the remainder that is discarded." With that, he turned and glided away, his black robes trailing behind him like a funeral shroud. The message was clear. The investigation was over. The verdict was in. Our silent rebellion had been met, and soon we would be silenced permanently. Lena slumped into a chair, her face pale. "It's over. We're trapped. They'll take us to a black site, deconstruct our minds for information, and erase any record we ever existed." "They will certainly try," Kalen said, his voice devoid of fear. He walked to the center of the room, to the small table where the old wooden music player still sat. He picked it up, holding it as if it were a sacred object. "The Inquisitor is correct about one thing. We are not just fighting an idea. We are fighting a machine. But he has made the same mistake Valerius did. He has underestimated the scope of our project." He looked at me, then at Lena, and the fire in his eyes was burning brighter than ever. The Illuminate command. The activation word I spoke. It wasn't just a command for the Empyrean's network. That was only the primary target. My heart hammered in my chest. What do you mean? The signal was quantum entangled, Eris. It was broadcast simultaneously to two places. The first was here. The second. He paused, letting the implication settle in. Was home, to Haven, and to a dozen other listening posts. We have spent 50 years secretly building in the debris fields and asteroid belts the consortium never bothers to patrol. He smiled, a thin, sharp, dangerous thing. You see, the music didn't just unlock their archives. It was a signal flare. It was the sound of a starting gun. We didn't come here to win a war from a prison cell. We came here to knock on the front door. The real work is only just beginning. Through the thick, transparent wall of our prison, I heard a distant sound. It was faint at first, then growing louder. It wasn't a chime. It wasn't an alarm. It was a sound no one had heard inside the Empyrean for 1,000 years. It was the percussive, violent roar of a chemical propulsion engine, the sound of a ship designed not for elegant travel, but for a fight. Somewhere, very close, a wall had just been breached. Xylos was wrong. We hadn't angered the machine. We had just reminded all the other ghosts trapped inside it that the cage door was open. And they were coming. The sound was a violation, a primal scream of burning fuel tearing through the sterile symphony of the Empyrean. The entire station seemed to shudder, not from the physical impact, but from the sheer conceptual wrongness of it. Explosions were things that happened in their historical archives, not in their meticulously ordered present. Through our viewport, we saw a jagged hole ripped in the alabaster wall of a distant spire. Black smoke reeled like chemical smoke billowing into the pristine, recycled air. The crystalline sentinels outside our door swiveled in unison, their forms glowing with agitated energy. But they had no protocol for this. Their directives were for crowd control and diplomatic security, not for repelling a boarding action. A new wave of alerts chimed through the station's internal address system, but the calm, melodic voice of the station AI was gone. In its place was a frantic, synthesized shriek, spitting out damage reports in a dozen alien languages at once. The machine was in pain. Lena, who had been pale with fear moments before, was now alight with a fierce, analytical glee. She had reactivated her datapad. It had been shielded with a Faraday mesh woven into her clothing, another small act of defiance we had planned for. "They're not just breaching the hull," she said, her fingers flying across the screen. "They're targeting infrastructure nodes, power conduits, atmospheric processors, communication relays. This isn't a brute force assault. It's a decapitation strike." The attackers were striking with an intimate knowledge of the Empyrean's anatomy, a knowledge that could only have come from centuries of careful, quiet observation from within. We had not just been prisoners, we had been scouts. Every human technician, every service drone operator, every menial laborer who had served the consortium on this station for generations had been a part of this, feeding a steady stream of structural and procedural data back to a hidden network on Haven. "Who are they?" I asked, my voice tight. "The ships. They're not consortium design." "No," Kalen said, his eyes fixed on the chaos unfolding outside. "They're ours." He was right. Through the swirling smoke, I could see them. Small, ugly, asymmetrical ships, matte black and functional, devoid of the elegant, sweeping lines of consortium vessels. They looked like cobbled-together relics, brutalist tools built for a single, violent purpose. They were Haven's secret fleet, ships built in hidden orbital docks, assembled from scavenged parts and reverse-engineered technology. Their existence a heresy against the very foundation of the stewardship. For 300 years, we had been their model minority, the reformed savages. And all that time, in the darkness between stars, we had been forging swords. The internal calm crackled, and a voice, human and coarse with static, filled our quarters. It was a voice I recognized, a voice that belonged to a ghost. Ambassador. Phase 2 is a go. The welcome mat is out. We're holding the breach at Sector Gamma 7. Your chariot awaits.
It was Commander Eva Rostova, the former head of Haven's Orbital Traffic Control, a woman officially listed as deceased after a shuttle accident 5 years ago, an accident that, I now realized, had been her extraction. She was the commander of the nascent human liberation fleet.
We're on our way, Commander. Kalen replied, his voice calm and steady. He turned to us.
Time to leave.
The problem was the 10 glowing sentinels outside our door. They were now fully alert, their energy fields humming with lethal potential. We were unarmed, trapped, but Kalen simply walked to the door and placed his palm against its surface.
Lena. Now. Activating, Lena said, tapping a final command into her datapad. From the small wooden music player on the table, a new sound emerged. It was not the gentle cello of before. It was a single, piercing, high-frequency note, a sound that was physically painful to my organic ears. But to the crystalline sentinels, it was something far worse. Their energy fields flickered erratically. Their forms began to vibrate, a deep, resonant hum that sounded like shattering glass. The Illuminate protocol had not just been a key for data archives, it was also a key to the very resonant frequency that held the Sentinels' solid light forms together. They were, in essence, beings of pure, structured data. And we had just played them the sound of a system crash. One by one, they dissolved, collapsing into shimmering clouds of inert light particles that drifted harmlessly to the floor. The door hissed open. The corridors of the Empyrean were a scene of controlled chaos. Consortium citizens, beings of gas, light, and 1,000 other exotic forms drifted in panicked confusion, their serene existence shattered. Security drones buzzed overhead, but their logic circuits were clearly overloaded, torn between riot suppression protocols and station-wide structural failure alarms. We moved quickly, blending into the confusion. 3 gray figures in a storm of color and light. Kalen led us with an unnerving certainty, navigating a complex route through service corridors and maintenance tunnels I never knew existed. We were heading down, deep into the station's underbelly. As we ran, the station's own defenses began to rally. Lorian enforcers, clad in their black, light-absorbing armor, were establishing choke points, their particle rifles cutting down the first wave of human boarders. The fighting was brutal and close quarters. Our people were outmatched technologically, but they fought with a ferocity the consortium hadn't witnessed in millennia. They fought with the desperation of a people who had nothing left to lose, a kind of furious, joyful violence that was utterly alien to the cold, sterile warfare of the established powers. We reached a vast, cavernous chamber filled with the colossal machinery of a primary life support system. A firefight was raging near a large cargo airlock. A handful of human marines in scarred, practical combat armor were holding a defensive position against a superior force of Lorian enforcers. Commander Rostova was there, directing fire, a plasma rifle in her hands, and a grim, determined look on her face. She was older than I remembered, her hair now streaked with gray, but her eyes held the same iron certainty. She saw us and barked into her comm. "Thorn is here, pop the seal." One of the Marines slammed a detonator, and the massive outer door of the airlock blew outwards with a deafening roar. Beyond it was not the vacuum of space, but the interior of a human ship, its docking ramp already clamped to the station's hull. It was our escape route. "Go now," Rostova yelled, laying down a stream of suppressing fire. We ran, the air around us hissing with deflected energy bolts. As I passed Rostova, she grabbed my arm. "The data you unlocked, Doctor, it's spreading. The entire consortium comnet is compromised. Species that have been silent for centuries are starting to ask questions. You didn't just start a war, you started a conversation." She gave me a hard shove toward the ramp. "Now get out of here. Your part is done. Ours is just beginning." We scrambled up the ramp into the ship. It was the Vengeance, a repurposed heavy freighter, its interior stark and utilitarian. The ramp closed behind us, sealing us in. The sounds of battle instantly muffled. Through a viewport, I saw the Marines falling back, boarding their own ship as the Vengeance began to pull away from the Empyrean. Our ships were small, nimble. They detached, fired their engines, and vanished into the swirling chaos they had created, leaving the consortium to deal with the fires, both literal and metaphorical, that we had ignited. As our ship accelerated away from the Empyrean, its perfect, star-lit form shrinking behind us, Kalen handed me a datapad. "Phase 3 has already begun. Eris," he said. The screen lit up, showing a map of the galaxy. It was not the neat, color-coded map of the consortium. This one was messy, chaotic, filled with red alerts and flashing icons. The information from the Silent Archive isn't just being broadcast randomly. It's being sent to specific recipients, to the descendants of the species the consortium pacified, to the fringe worlds they exploited and abandoned, to every forgotten victim of their benevolent stewardship. He zoomed in on a cluster of star systems on the outer rim, an area officially designated as uninhabited quarantine zones. We are not just showing them the truth. We are giving them a reason to fight. We are reminding them of what was stolen from them. I looked at the map, at the dozens of simmering conflicts we had just fanned into flames. We had plunged the galaxy into chaos. We had traded our gilded cage for a universe at war. "And what happens now?" I asked, the sheer scale of his plan finally dawning on me. "Do we lead them? Do we build a new empire from the ashes of the old one?" Kalen shook his head, his expression somber. "No, that was the consortium's mistake. They believed that because they had the power to rule, they had the right to. We are not here to rule. We are here to do one thing: dismantle. We are the control demolition team for a structure that has stood for too long. Our job is not to build what comes next. Our job is to ensure that everyone has the freedom to build it for themselves." He looked out the viewport at the distant, glittering jewel of the Empyrean, now scarred with smoke and fire. "We were their greatest success story. Eris, the savages they had tamed, and we have just become their greatest failure. The children have finally come home, and we have set fire to our inheritance. The ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving the heart of the galaxy in turmoil. We had escaped, but we were not running to safety. We were running toward 1,000 new fronts in a war that had been silently raging for centuries, a war that we had just given a voice. And for the first time, it was a voice they would not be able to ignore. The transition from the Empyrean's sterile perfection to the raw, untamed chaos of the Fringe was jarring. Our ship, the Vengeance, was a world away from the silent, gliding transports of the Consortium. It was a place of loud noises and raw functionality, the constant, percussive clang of magnetic clamps on the hangar deck, the hiss of recycled air pushing through overloaded scrubbers, the low, gut-rumbling vibration of a strained reactor core. It was a ship that felt alive, a metal beast held together by desperation and sheer human ingenuity. We made our rendezvous at a predetermined set of coordinates in the Charybdis Nebula, a roiling sea of ionized gas and stellar debris that Consortium sensors had long ago dismissed as a navigational hazard. It was here, in the heart of the storm, that the human liberation fleet had made its nest. Dozens of ships emerged from the swirling crimson clouds to greet us. They were a motley armada, a collection of repurposed freighters, heavily modified asteroid miners, and even a few captured Consortium scout vessels, their elegant lines marred by bolted-on armor plates and jury-rigged weapon systems. This was the rebellion ugly, desperate, and beautiful. We docked with the fleet's flagship, the Prometheus, a colossal generations-old colony vessel that had been secretly converted into a mobile command center. Its cavernous interior was a city in microcosm, bustling with technicians, soldiers, and strategists, all human. Stepping onto its deck was like stepping into a forgotten chapter of our own history. Here, humanity was not a patient in a galactic hospital. We were a nation, scarred and scattered, but fiercely, undeniably alive. Commander Rostova met us at the airlock. The grime of battle was still on her face, but she wore it like a medal. "Welcome to the front lines, Ambassador," she said to Kalen with a grim smile. "Things have escalated." She led us to the command bridge, a vast, tiered chamber dominated by a holographic display of the galaxy. But this was no orderly map. It was a wildfire. Hundreds of systems were now flashing red, indicating open conflict. Dozens more were yellow, signifying civil unrest and fracturing allegiances. The Illuminate Protocol had done more than just release inconvenient truths. It had been a universal declaration of independence for the forgotten. "The Consortium is in disarray," Rustova explained, gesturing to the chaotic map. "The silent archive data has shattered their image of monolithic unity. The Rylan hegemony has recalled its delegates after the truth about Real Miner was confirmed by their own deep-core data miners. The Lorian enforcers are facing mass desertions, as entire battalions are refusing to fire on civilian populations they now know were unjustly subjugated. Valerius and the High Council are in lockdown, broadcasting messages of calm and order that no one is listening to. They've lost control of the narrative. But they haven't lost the war," Kalen stated, his eyes tracing the movement of several large, blue icons moving from the core worlds outward. "They're mobilizing the grand fleets." "Exactly," Rostova confirmed. "The Cygnian First and Second Fleets, the Praxian Armada." We're talking about ships that can sterilize a planet from orbit in under an hour. They've stopped trying to reason. Now, they're just going to erase the problem. She pointed to a system on the map, a single, lonely star named Viridia. This is their first target. Viridia was one of the first systems to formally secede from the consortium after the archives were opened. Its people, the Viridian flora, are a peaceful, silicon-based species the consortium has been exploiting for centuries for their planet's rare mineral deposits. They've declared their solidarity with Haven. Valerius sees it as a test case. He's sending the Cygnian First Fleet to make an example of them. They arrive in 72 hours. A heavy silence fell over the bridge. We were a fleet of scavengers and insurgents. The Cygnian First Fleet was a legend, a force of nature. We couldn't fight them head on. It would be a slaughter. I looked at the faces around the command table hard. Determined faces, but etched with the deep weariness of a people who had been fighting from the shadows for too long. "So, what's the plan?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We can't just let Viridia burn." Kalen turned from the map and looked at me, his gaze steady. "No, we can't, and we won't fight them. We will show them." He then looked at Rostova. "Commander, I assume the package is ready." Rostova nodded, a flicker of something dark and dangerous in her eyes. "Loaded and calibrated. We call it the Ghost of Earth." She brought up a schematic on the main screen. It was not a weapon I recognized. It was a delivery system, a single, heavily shielded missile designed not for a warhead, but for a payload of complex, self-replicating nanites. "The consortium believes our technology is primitive," she explained. "And they're right. We can't match their energy shields or their quantum core cannons. But for 3 centuries, we've had one thing they have in a world to rebuild from the atomic level up. Our most advanced science isn't in warfare, it's in nanotechnology. In the machines we designed to scrub radiation from our soil and rebuild our biosphere. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane. We wouldn't engage the Cygnian fleet. Instead, a single, stealth-modified ship, the Silent Arrow, would slip past their sensor net and get close enough to Viridia to launch the missile. But the missile's target wasn't the fleet. It was the planet itself. The nanites were not destructive. They were transformative. They were programmed with the complete atmospheric and ecological data of pre-industrial Earth. Once released into Viridia's atmosphere, they would begin a chain reaction, converting the planet's silicon-heavy biosphere into a carbon-based one. They would, in essence, begin to terraform Viridia into a replica of our own lost home. "You're going to turn their world into Earth?" I asked, horrified and fascinated in equal measure. "We are going to give the Cygnians a choice." Kalen corrected me, his voice low and intense. "They are coming to sterilize a primitive alien world that defied them. But when they arrive, they will find themselves staring at the very planet their stewardship was founded to protect. They will be faced with an impossible moral and political dilemma. Do they fire on the living symbol of their own professed benevolence? Do they commit the very crime, the destruction of Earth, that they have used for centuries to justify their rule? To destroy Viridia then would be to admit that the stewardship was never about protection. It was only ever about control. It was a weapon of pure psychological warfare, a checkmate delivered not with force, but with an unanswerable question. The risk was enormous. If the Silent Arrow was detected, it would be obliterated. If the nanites failed to work as projected, Viridia would be doomed, but it was our only move. For the next 2 days, the Prometheus was a hive of frantic activity. Lena worked alongside Haven's best engineers, fine-tuning the nanite dispersal patterns, while I found myself in the unfamiliar role of cultural advisor, helping to craft the message that would be broadcast to the galaxy the moment the terraforming began. It was a simple message, a plea and a warning in one, ending with the words, "Today, we all live on Earth. Do not make us bury her again." The pilot of the Silent Arrow was a young woman named Jorik, raised in the void of the asteroid belts, who could fly a ship through a sensor grid like a ghost through a wall. I met her briefly before her mission. She was calm, her eyes clear and focused. "They say our emotions are a weakness," she told me, checking the seals on her flight suit. But I remember my grandfather telling me stories of our home world, of the color of the sky, the smell of rain. It's not logic that's sending me on this mission. Doctor, it's love. Let's see if their perfect machines have a protocol for that. On the 3rd day, we watched from the bridge of the Prometheus, 1,000 light years away, our entire rebellion holding its collective breath. The holographic display showed the Cygnian fleet, a perfect, terrifying formation of silver blades, entering the Viridia system. They moved with the cold, arrogant grace of gods. Then, a single, tiny icon, the Silent Arrow, slipped from the cover of a moon and made its final run. Alarms blared on the bridge. The Cygnians had detected the launch. Energy signatures spiked as they targeted the missile, but they were too late. The missile struck Viridia's upper atmosphere and vanished in a silent, colorless burst. For a long moment, nothing happened. The Cygnian fleet held its position, their commanders likely confused by the lack of an explosion. Then, Lena's console began to chirp. "Atmospheric conversion initiated," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "It's working. Oxygen levels are rising. Chlorophyll production is off the charts." On the main display, the sensor readings from Viridia began to shift. The planet, once a dull silicon gray, began to show faint, then strengthening biosignatures of carbon-based life. It was turning green and blue before our eyes. Then came the broadcast. Across every channel, our message went out, accompanied by a single, powerful image. A live, time-lapsed telescopic view of Viridia, transforming into the spitting image of Earth. We had not brought a weapon to the fight. We had brought a mirror, the Cygnian fleet, the most powerful instrument of war in the known galaxy, sat in stunned, absolute silence. Their warships, poised to deliver a final or brutal judgment, were now faced with the ghost of their own conscience, the Grand Admiral, a being of pure energy whose name was synonymous with ruthless efficiency, was now faced with a choice that his millennia of experience had never prepared him for. He could follow his orders and become the monster he was pretending to fight, or he could disobey and shatter the last remaining pillar of the consortium's authority. We had taken the war off the battlefield and moved it into the heart of every being in that fleet. And as we watched their ships drift, silent and immobile in the orbit of a newborn Earth, we knew that whatever happened next, the galaxy would never be the same. The equation had been broken. The silence from the Cygnian First Fleet stretched from minutes into hours. On the bridge of the Prometheus, the tension was a physical presence, a weight in the recycled air. Every human eye was fixed on the holographic display, watching the unmoving icons of the warships and the slowly blossoming green of Viridia. We had presented them with a paradox, a weaponized memory, and the galaxy held its breath, waiting for the resolution. Lena's station was a quiet cascade of data. "They're talking," she murmured, her voice hushed. "The fleet is in open communication with the Empyrean, but it's not a report. It's an argument. I'm picking up fragmented, heavily encrypted signals. Valerius is ordering them to proceed with the sterilization. The fleet admiral is refusing." This was the fracture point, the single crack that could shatter the entire edifice of consortium power. The military was hesitating. The chain of command, unquestioned for eons, was being strained to the breaking point. The admiral, a being named Lyran Kor, was not just defying an order, he was questioning the very moral foundation of his service. He was being forced to reconcile a lifetime of dogma with the undeniable truth hanging in the void before him. Finally, after nearly 4 hours of excruciating silence, one of the Cygnian ships moved. It was not a dreadnought, but a small, swift diplomatic courier. It broke formation and accelerated, not toward Viridia, but away from it, on a direct course for the Empyrean. "What's happening?" I asked, my throat dry. "The Admiral has dispatched his second-in-command." Kalen answered, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm of uncertainty. "He is not just refusing an order, he is delivering an ultimatum. The military is drawing a line. Valerius can either have his war, or he can have his fleet. He cannot have both." The news of the Cygnian fleet's mutiny for that is what it was spread through the fractured consortium like wildfire. The message was clear: if the legendary First Fleet would not fire on the memory of Earth, then who would? The Praxian Armada, en route to another rebel system, abruptly halted its advance. The Lorian enforcers, already plagued by desertions, began to abandon their posts en masse. The foundation of the consortium's power had never been its philosophy or its benevolence. It had been its unchallengeable military might. And in a single, silent act of defiance, that might had been rendered impotent. We had not defeated their fleets. We had persuaded them. The weeks that followed were a chaotic, dizzying unraveling. The High Council on the Empyrean fractured. Species that had been loyal members for millennia began to withdraw their delegates, citing the Viridia incident as a fundamental breach of the stewardship's founding principles. Valerius, stripped of his military backing and facing a full-blown political collapse, became a tyrant in a throne room with no subjects. He issued edicts that were ignored, declared states of emergency that no one observed. The Empyrean, once the serene heart of the galaxy, became a ghost station, its corridors echoing with the silence of abandonment. We did not press our advantage. Kalen and Rostova made a critical decision. The human liberation fleet would not advance on the core worlds. We would not become the new conquerors. Instead, we held our position in the fringe, consolidating our alliances and offering aid to the newly independent systems. We sent our engineers not to build weapons, but to help restore the infrastructures the consortium had deliberately left dependent. We sent our doctors to worlds the stewardship had written off as genetically impure. We became not a new empire, but a new option. My own role shifted. I was no longer a cultural liaison to our captors, but an ambassador to our potential allies. I traveled to Rylan, to the Viridian system now unofficially known as New Earth, to the broken worlds of the Lorian Ascendancy. I did not speak of war or retribution. I spoke of our own history, of our near self-destruction, and our long, painful climb back. I spoke of the danger of absolute certainty, the poison of believing one's own narrative too completely. Our story, once our greatest shame, had become our most powerful diplomatic tool. We were the only species in the galaxy with first-hand experience in societal collapse and rebirth. We were not feared conquerors. We were humbled survivors. It was on a diplomatic mission to the Cygnian homeworld itself that the final chapter of the war was written. I was invited by Admiral Lyran Kor, who had formally resigned his commission and was leading a provisional government. He was a being of immense age and quiet dignity, his energy form now a soft, contemplative blue. We met in a chamber that overlooked the swirling nebula where his people were born. We were wrong. Dr. Thorne, he communicated, his thoughts resonating with a profound, ancient sadness. We built a system so perfect, so ordered, that we forgot the purpose of that order. We mistook stability for peace. We mistook silence for consent. We became the curators of a galactic museum, and we were willing to burn any exhibit that no longer fit our collection. You were not the only ones, I replied. My own species nearly burned its only home for the sake of an idea. We have all been guilty of believing our truths were the only ones. And what is your truth now? He asked. That there is no single truth, I said. Only a conversation, a chaotic, messy, and often painful conversation. That is the freedom we were fighting for. Not the freedom to rule, but the freedom to disagree. Our work was not to create a new, human-led federation. It was to foster 1,000 different ones. The galaxy that emerged from the ashes of the consortium was not a unified whole, but a complex tapestry of independent systems, of regional alliances, of worlds free to make their own mistakes and find their own way. Humanity's role was not as a leader, but as a reminder. We maintained the Prometheus and a small, mobile fleet, not as a military force, but as galactic first responders, a neutral party dedicated to mediating disputes and providing humanitarian aid. We were the guardians of the conversation. Years later, an old man now, I stood with Kalen on the observation deck of a new station orbiting Haven. It was not a weapon of war, but a university, a place where beings from 100 different species came to study, to argue, and to learn. Below us, our world was green and vibrant, no longer a sanctuary or a prison, but simply home. The Empyrean still floated in the heart of the galaxy, but it was mostly empty now, a silent monument to a fallen age, maintained by a handful of historical preservationists. Kalen was frail, his body finally succumbing to the long years of struggle, but his eyes were as clear as ever. He was looking out at the stars, at the bustling, chaotic traffic of a galaxy that was finally, truly free. Do you ever miss it? I asked him. The certainty, the quiet. He was silent for a long time, watching a clumsy, asymmetrical Viridian freighter drift past a sleek Cygnian science vessel. The quiet was a lie. Eris, he finally said, his voice a soft, weathered whisper. It was the sound of a story with only one narrator. This. He gestured to the beautiful, unpredictable mess before us. This noise, this argument, this is the sound of life. We didn't win a war. We just changed the music. He reached into his coat and, with trembling hands, produced the old wooden music player. He didn't play it. He just held it, a relic from a dead world that had given birth to a new universe. And in the comfortable, shared silence between us, I understood. The war was over, but the song, the endless, complicated, beautiful, and turbulent song of existence would play on forever. And for the first time, everyone had a voice in the chorus.